Welcome to Learning Math with Mr. Tan. Today I'll be talking about quadratic formula. Alright, and in quadratic formula, the reason why we study quadratic formula is this. Basically, we have learned before how to factorize a quadratic expression, and then furthermore we use that to solve quadratic equations. But there are certain situations whereby we cannot factorize the expression, and therefore we're stuck. And assuming that solutions do exist, we still want to be able to solve these equations, and generally speaking, that means the solutions may not be very neat. They may have very long decimals, so we still want to develop a more general way of solving it. So therefore, this is where quadratic formula comes in. Okay, so the important thing in quadratic formula is this: we need to identify what are the coefficients of each of the terms, and this coefficient is the number to the left of the variable itself. So for example, the coefficient of x squared, so this is the x squared term, and the coefficient we will label it as a. Alright, and the x term we will label the coefficient as b, and the coefficient of the x power 0 term, which in simple layman term is called the constant term, we shall label it as c. Okay, so these are just labeling convention. A few more important things for me to go through before we move on to the example is this. Very importantly, the right hand side has to be 0. Alright, so in cases whereby it is not 0, then you move the number to the left hand side by subtracting or adding on the left hand side and right hand side of the equation. So that's fine. As long as we ensure that the right hand side equals to 0, then we should be close to moving on to solving it. But also, very importantly is this. Now notice that my terms are in the order of x squared, x, and constant, so it has to be in that order. The x squared term has to come first, then followed by the x term, if there are any. Sometimes there aren't, and then the constant term comes last, and sometimes the constant term is not there as well. But in cases where they are not in that specific order, for example, let me just scribble an example here. For example, they could give you something like that looks like this. Okay, or maybe this, right? Then we will need to rearrange them such that the x squared term comes first, followed by the x term, and then finally the constant term. Okay, so that's that. Then we move on to solving it. So we're going to use the quadratic formula, which basically when we solve an equation, we really want to look for the value of x. Alright, so straight away we go into x equals to negative b plus or minus square root of b squared minus 4ac over 2a in the denominator. Okay, and this formula simply requires you to just substitute in the values of a, b, and c, which are the coefficients of the x squared term, the x term, and then finally the constant term. Okay, so we furthermore need to realize this, that there is that plus or minus sign there. That means we basically break into two sets of solution. Now recall that quadratic equations have at most two solutions, so sometimes there could be no solution, sometimes there could be one pair of repeated solution, and then finally sometimes most times that we encounter, there will be two sets of distinct solutions. Okay, so this is the reason why there are two solutions coming out of there. And we'll move on to the example. So we have a pretty straightforward question to solve. So we have solve x squared plus 3x minus 5 equals to 0. So just do a quick visual glance over everything, check, and the x squared term comes first, then followed by the x term, and then the constant term. So that's fine. Right hand side equals to 0, we're good to go. Okay, so first of all, the coefficient of x is positive 3, so obviously the positive does matter. Okay, you do not need to put in the positive later on when you substitute into the formula, but that's fine. Do realize that there is a difference between plus 3x and minus 3x, so obviously that's going to affect our solution. So therefore we need to bear in mind that the sign do matter. If we have minus 3x, for example, then we should put it accordingly. And of course the constant term is negative 5, and then finally I will get to the x squared term. Now oftentimes we think that when we don't see any number to the left of a variable, that means it is 0, because we associate the nothingness that we see with the nothingness of a number. So in the number world, we see 0 as the concept of nothing. All right, so we don't see any number there. Our mind subconsciously register that perhaps as nothing, so we associate that with 0. Now that is clearly not true. So for example, uh let's say it is 0, right? And then it should by right be 0 multiplied with x squared, right? But if we take 0 to multiply with x squared, that means x squared will become 0, right? So essentially any number multiplied with 0 will become 0, right? So if I take 0 multiplied with x squared, then it will just be 0 and x squared will just disappear. But clearly there is an x squared here. So it is not actually 0, it is actually 1, because 1 multiplied with x squared is, well, just 1x squared. So we just put x squared because we all understand that as 1x squared. Alright, so we shall put a as 1. Okay, so let's proceed on to substitute into the quadratic formula. So it's negative b, which I can substitute 3 in, plus minus square root of b square, which is 3 square, minus 4ac, so I'm going to substitute in 1 and negative 5. Alright, and over to a, that's 2 multiplied with 1 in the denominator. So furthermore, we're going to break into two sets of solutions, and it's negative 3 plus something inside the square root. Now, generally speaking, for Singaporean exams, it's typically about 3 to 4 marks for this kind of questions. So the thing is, there could be a possibility of the examiner wanting you to show that you are able to evaluate b squared minus 4ac, just to ensure that you did not use the calculator to automatically get the solution. So therefore it's good to first compute what is b squared minus 4ac. So for this case, I will put in 3 squared minus 4a, and c is negative 5. Alright, so that's actually 29, and clearly it is not a perfect square. Alright, so we're not going to expect a very nice answer out of this. So furthermore, just to calculate this, then we will have negative 3, alright, plus the square root of 29. Oops, that's 29 over 2. Alright, so that is 1.19. In general, we can just leave the answer as 3 significant figures. Okay, or it could also be negative 3 minus square root of 29 over 2, and that would give us negative 4.19, again to 3 significant figures. Now I wouldn't actually evaluate square root of 29 only, because this is going to give us a lot of decimal in the numerator, and I don't really want to deal with that and where to truncate my answer. So I would prefer to leave 29 in the square roots and then evaluating at the very last step. So now we'll look at example 2. Now sometimes in our equation, right, the x squared term is not positive. It is a negative number. It is a negative coefficient in front of the x squared. Now, that how do we deal with it? We'll just deal with it accordingly. So what happens is, for example, for negative 2x squared minus 4x plus 7 equals to 0, we're going to identify the a as negative 2. So it does not affect how we do things, because we're just going to substitute, we're just going to replace all the a in the formula accordingly. Alright, so b, there is negative 4, and c is positive 7. So we'll just put 7 since we're now familiar with that. The next thing is we're going to substitute each of these of a, b, and c into the formula. So the first thing is, in the numerator, it is negative b. Now, be very careful. Negative b means negative of negative 4. Now, this is a very, very common mistake, because we see the negative here and we forget that there is a negative sign in the formula itself. So we forget to put one of the negative sign. It could be because sometimes we see the negative in the formula already, then we forget that and it becomes so natural, and we stop thinking about having another negative sign, which is b equals to negative 4. Then we leave that out. So that will cause mistakes. So whenever b is a negative value, just be very careful in terms of that. So maybe let me just make this a little bit longer. Alright, the next possible place to make a mistake is this. Inside the square root, right, there is a b square. Now, b square, you need to put a bracket, and then only inside the bracket you put negative 4. So again, what will be a potential mistake is this. So people make this mistake, minus 4ac, whatever that is for now. And negative 4 square is clearly different from bracket of negative 4 and outside a square, because then the square only applies to this 4 when it's without the bracket, but with the bracket the square will apply to also the negative sign in a sense. So it actually is, in short, negative 4 multiplied with negative 4. However, if you write this, then it will become negative of 4 square, which will turn out to be a negative number. So then which version is correct? Obviously, we know which version is correct. So, but the question is still which version is correct and why. So obviously the formula is b square minus 4ac. We are applying the square to the b. Alright, so if b is negative, then I will still need to square this negative number. So squaring this negative number means it is essentially going to be a negative number times a negative number, which will give me a positive number. So in short, we need to leave the value of b inside the square root just to take care of that part. Okay, so all in all, we'll just stick to this if that's a little bit confusing to understand, and we should be fine. Alright, so then we'll proceed on. Minus 4ac, we'll put minus 4 of negative 2 and c 7, and then over to a, which is negative 2. Okay, so we're going to break them into two sets of solution again. So in the denominator, I would like to take care of that first. It is negative 4. So when there's a negative number in the denominator and it standing alone by itself, we should put a bracket just to be very, very clear. And in the numerator, this is 4. Alright, and let's compute what is the number inside of the square root. Okay, so let's put it in the bracket. Oops, doesn't seem to come out. Okay, so negative 4 square. So negative 4 square minus 4a, which is negative 2. C, which is 7, and that gives us 72. So we're going to fill that into each of the square root here, and then let's compute what this is, and let's put the fraction. 4 plus square root of 72 over 2a, which is negative 4, right? That will give us negative 3.12. And the other solution will be, again, the fraction 4 minus square root of 72 over negative 4, right? And that's 1.12. Again, both the solutions we're going to give to 3 significant figures. So I hope this video helps you to gain an understanding of how to use a quadratic formula to solve quadratic equations in general. So in general, the quadratic equations can be solved this way. If, for example, you're missing certain terms, like for example, if the x term is missing, then we will substitute the coefficient as 0. But otherwise, in general, you should be quite comfortable by now to handle any quadratic equation. So thank you for watching this video. If you like this video and it does help you, please do like and subscribe or share with your friends and help them along with their learning of mathematics. Until the next time, goodbye.